Can history repeat itself? Can Madison Square Garden be Eden again? We look at that in this episode of From the Bench, a Knicks podcast. The answers are extremely interesting. Hi, I'm Mike Spendley, your host of From the Bench, a Knicks podcast. I'm a proud ex-ball boy of the New York Knicks in 1972 and 1973. Both years, we went to the NBA Finals. And in 1973, the Knicks won the NBA Championship, and they haven't won since. We're going to talk with Mr. Harvey Araton and see if there's some similarities between this year's team. My special guest, he wrote the #1 book about 1970 and 1973 NBA champion New York Knicks. The book is When the Garden Was Eden. The book was also transformed into an ESPN 30 for 30 episode, co-produced by today's guest, Harvey Araton. Harvey worked for 4 daily newspapers in the New York area. In 2017, he was the recipient of the Kirk Gowdy Award at the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame in Springfield, Mass., given annually to the print, digital, and broadcasting members of the media. Today, I'm here to talk with Harvey about his lifelong love of the New York Knicks and the very special book, When the Garden Was Eden. Harvey, welcome to From the Bench, a Knicks podcast.
Well, thank you for having me, Mike. Pleasure to be here.
When the Garden Was Eden was published in or around 2011. What made you pull the trigger on the book at that time, some 38 years after the Knicks that you wrote about at the Garden?
Yeah, well, initially, I have to admit the book was not my idea. ESPN at that time had an arrangement with one of the publishing houses. An editor I knew at ESPN approached me as they were getting close to the anniversary of the 70 championship. And I guess that would have been the 40th. And he asked if I would be interested in doing a book. And then we talked about it. And by the time they got their act together to greenlight the project, it was too close to the actual anniversary for me to feel like I had the time to report it the way I would want to. And, to be honest, I remember my initial reaction also was, God, there were so many books written about those Knicks championship teams. There's an old saying, I think it probably came out of Boston, given the Celtics and all their success, about the Knicks in the 70s. And it was so many books, so few championships. And, it was kind of like a derisive reaction to how much publicity those Knicks got compared to what the Celtics achieved during the Bill Russell years, the 11 championships in 13 years. And that's all true. But the Knicks were on Broadway, basically, and that was sort of like the dawn of a different era. And you had Madison Avenue right next door, getting a sense of what the Knicks could be, of what they could become. That you had all the celebrities at courtside. I'm sure you saw them all, from Dustin Hoffman to Woody Allen to Redford and Streisand. And I think Madison Avenue during those years began to see the potential of the blurring of sports and entertainment, which is what, of course, the NBA has become today. Anyway, I said no to ESPN, and because I just didn't think we had enough time to report it the way I would have wanted to. And then my agent, who didn't really want to let go of the project, suggested to me, why don't we see if we could position it so that it envelops the entire era and the 2 championships. And so at that point, I did a proposal, and we shopped it around, and I believe it was HarperCollins outbid a couple of other publishers for the rights to it, and they went ahead and did it. I will say this, though. Even after that, I was a little skeptical of taking on the project, but it was only when I sat down to reread Dave DeBusschere's, he wrote a book. It was a diary of the 1969-70 season. And I was reading it to just kind of refresh my memory and to see if there was anything that would kind of get me excited about it. And somewhere in the middle of that book, he told a story in like one or two, I'd say 2 paragraphs, about how Cazzie Russell during the 69-70 season, the Knicks pulled into Detroit for a game against the Pistons at the old Cobo Arena. And Cazzie took the opportunity to go back to Ann Arbor, where he had gone to college. And on the way back to Detroit to attend practice, he got pulled over by state police and pulled out of his car at gunpoint. And apparently the story was that there was an escaped convict from some penitentiary in the area, and The guy was black and he had a beard. And so they kind of racially profiled Cazzie. When they realized who he was, they apologized, put him back in the car. He got to practice and he was really in a foul mood. And he went on the court and he started taking out his frustrations on a couple of the white guys on the team, Phil Jackson, like Reardon and Bradley, of course. And of course, Bradley was his rival for playing time. And at some point, Willis Reed stops practice and he says, Cazzie, what the hell are you doing? And Cazzie, before he could edit himself, said to Willis Reed, a black man who grew up at the Jim Crow South in Louisiana, be quiet, Uncle Tom. And at that point, Willis, being Willis, could have torn Cazzie to shreds. I mean, everybody in those days remembered Willis tearing apart the Lakers' entire team after Rudy LaRusso took a swing at him. But Willis being Willis and understanding that if you let the politics and racial conflict of that era infect the team, it was a biracial team, it might destroy their chemistry and might blow up the entire season. So Willis took a moment to think it over, and then he said something to the effect of, you better start playing the right way or this Uncle Tom's going to be kicking some ass, right? In that moment, he gave Cazzie the time to sort of backtrack and apologize. And I remember thinking when reading those, it was just 2 paragraphs that DeBusschere included as a sort of little anecdote. And I said, by God, this is an entire chapter. This could be the most significant point of that championship season. So I decided at that moment that, yes, many books had been written about the Knicks championship teams, particularly the 69-70 team, but they were all written in the 1970s. I was taking on a project that had the lapse of time, of decades, and not only to look back with a fresher perspective, but also to know what became of all these principal players. Bill Bradley became a senator and ran for president. Willis Reed became, a coach and a general manager and a team president. Phil Jackson became the winningest NBA coach in history, and so on and so on. So with that perspective, I decided, yes, this is a project I did want to take on. And then we went about the chore, which is not an easy thing to get the remaining players. Obviously, Red had passed away by that time. DeBusschere had passed on by that point. So I needed all the players, the key players who were alive, to buy into the project and agree to spend significant time with me. And of course, I started with Willis, who was the captain. And in many ways, these great championship teams in any sport, decades later, they're like an old war platoon. And they look to the same leaders that they had back in the day when they were waging war, right? And so I knew if I could get Willis to agree to spend that time and buy into the project, that the other guys would fall into place. And that's pretty much what happened.
Thanks for watching From the Bench. And if you've liked what you've seen, we will be offering a members club of From the Bench called In the Huddle. Please send us your email, and we'll send you out all the information. Go to michaelspendley.com and leave us your email address, and we'll get everything that you need to get in that club. With an In the Huddle membership, you'll get viewing on all of our live events, interviews with Hall of Fame Knicks, and discounted merchandise. Please contact us at michaelspendley.com. Leave us your email, and we'll take care of the rest. That action alone solidified any part of that team that was not 100% bought in. And I think you're right. I think Willis was, in my opinion, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, leader of any sports team that I've rooted for. Anyway, he showed that all the time. My first year with the Knicks in 71, 72, he was injured. I think he only played 9 or 11 games. He had the bad cartilage in the leg. Mm-hmm. And he was always there at the home games. Even though he wasn't playing, he still led just by being there and just the force that he had. And then obviously in 72, 73, he wasn't near the same, but his presence, just like it did in Game 7 of their first championship, May 8th of 1970, he just had that leadership. So that's very interesting to see that the other guys fell in line. They saw their leader do it, respond to you, and that opened the floodgates, I guess. Still had to be a long process, though, getting everyone together, because the great part about the book to me was how you intertwined the players and really got to the root of what they were about, their past, their parents, how they treated people, how their sacrifice included the team, and everything about it was only the team. So I thought you did a terrific job of not just saying, well, we won game one of the series and then we lost game two, and roving box score. You gave it life and you put the personalities to the people. I thought it was brilliant, Harvey. I really did.
Well, thank you, Mike. One of the things that you try to do when you do a period piece like that is recreate what the world was like around that team. And I think the chapter I most enjoyed working on was the game seven. And obviously that's the one that, most people remember. Thousands of people claim to have been at the game when they probably weren't. But um,
It's true.
I think what I tried to do in that chapter, there was some individual stories that I was able to run down from an assortment of people. I mean, one of them was Marv Albert's younger brother, Steve, who had been at Kent State University, where the shootings took place on the day of Game 5 at the Garden. And then there was Richard Lapchick, who was the son of Joe Lapchick, who was, I believe he was in law school or graduate school somewhere in, it might have been Colorado, if I recall correctly. And he's watching the game and he knows his dad, who, coached the Knicks in the Ph's and, was an absolute titan of the sport, St. John's, all of that. And his dad was not well. And watching this game unfold and Knicks win the championship, and he's watching it on TV. Now, remember, around the rest of the country, Game 7 was not blacked out. They were watching it live, unlike those of us poor souls. I say poor souls, we couldn't see it live, but we did get to listen to Marv on the radio, which was a greatness in itself.
Sure.
Um, and there were a couple of others. There was a guy, oh, what's his name now? Is escaping me. He was the original Madman, and he had courtside seats, and he brought his son to the game, who was about 13 or 14 years old. And in the famous George Kalinsky photo of Willis coming out on the court from behind, you can see George Lois is the guy I'm thinking about. His son is standing in a white shirt behind the basket. And this story so moved me. So his son you could see his son like this, excited to see Willis coming out on the court with the rest of the 20,000 folks. Uh, and then that kid went to college. He was actually a pretty good basketball player. But when he was 19 or 20 years old, he died of heart failure suddenly. But George Kalinsky, after he developed that photo, noticed the kid under the basket and he created a copy and signed it to George Lois and sent it to him. And when I interviewed George Lois as one of the great Knicks fans of that era, he mentioned that photo and he said it was something that he kept on his night table from the time his son died. And I asked him, I said, obviously, it's something that's really special to you. And he said, yeah, because I want to remember my son as the happiest damn kid in the world. And when a parent who lost a child tells you a story like that, those stories, there was another one with Spike Lee having gone to the game as a kid. So I dropped those stories into that Game 7 chapter, which I also built the narrative around watching the first half of Game 7 on a video at the Garden with Walt Frazier. And Walt is, pointing out the different things that are happening on the court. He said when he was younger back then, he was really resentful of the fact that Willis got the Finals MVP because, after all, I mean, Walt had 36 and 18 in that game and pretty much took it over. But he said, as we were watching it, and after the first half, he had to go to work. It was before a game that he was broadcasting at the Garden. And he said, there's nothing else to see. We're winning. We're up 69-42. This game's over. And then he turned around to me and he said, but you know something? Watching this now, and I hadn't seen it in years, I understand why Willis was the MVP. He provided that emotional lift, and I took it from there. But maybe without what Willis did, I don't do what I did. Age and time and distance had made him reflect on the true contribution that Willis made. Yeah, that the ability to kind of recreate the world of 1960, let's say 1968 to 1974, which is the era that we cover in that book, was really a challenge. I was a kid back then, but talk to enough people, do enough research, and I'd like to think that I pulled it off a little bit.
You definitely pulled it off. And when you can, as I said before, intertwine that in with history, I think it gives the reader such an advantage over than just reading box scores. And the thing that I always loved more than anything about, especially working the Nick bench, okay, was the timeouts, just to watch the way they reacted. Okay. And to be quite honest, Walt Frazier was the coolest cat you'd ever see, just like people would think. Willis was a big sweater. DeBusschere was into it. Bradley was animated. You could take Clyde's uniform off after the game, throw a little powder on it, and hang it up. He just didn't sweat. He had a vein that would come out of the left side of his head in the last couple of moments. I lived for the timeouts. If I had to work the visitors' bench, I was just not myself. But I did everything they asked because from the first time I walked into that employee's entrance on 33rd Street, I was always worried, is this going to end? And quite frankly, it ended on a high note, but also put me into almost a sports depression after attending 105 straight games at Madison Square Garden and being a part of it, a very small part. It was depressing for a couple of years. And then the Knicks some of the guys started to retire, and then the team kind of disbanded. But the one thing that was constant, I had a great relationship with Red Holzman. In fact, the Knicks allowed me to go out to the finals in 1972. My dad flew me out. It was the first time I'd ever flown. He flew me out to the Forum, and with one exception or one demand, he said to Red and Danny Whalen, Mike has to go to Mass when he's out there. So somebody has to take him to church. And the Knicks played game one on a Wednesday night. Game two was a Sunday. They had a few days to practice and then go at high school in between. And I got a knock on the door from Dave DeBusschere, and he had Dave Anderson, the writer, with him. And the three of us went to church that Sunday morning very early. I think it was 7 o'clock Mass. And I'll never forget it. And then, ironically, Dave DeBusschere got hurt in game two of the 72 finals. It wasn't quite the same. The Lakers went on to win in 5 games. The experiences are vivid, but the one thing, even now when I see Walter, I call him Walter, not Clyde right now, the conversation, Harvey, always goes back to Red Holzman.
Mhm.
He was an amazing guy. A lot of people call him a blue-collar coach. Now, you knew him a little bit after, Eden on the other side. What were your sit-downs like with Red when you had them, when you talked with him?
I remember the first year I was on the beat and and Red came back. We landed in Chicago for a game in the afternoon the day before. Red had a favorite restaurant in Chicago. It was a steakhouse called Eli's. And whenever we went to Chicago, that was it. I got a call from Frankie Blousechild, who was Red's right-hand man, and
Great
said,
guy.
Red wants you to come out to dinner with us tonight. I said, all the writers are coming? No, just you. And so I go, fine, maybe I'll pick up some story or something. And so we go out, and Red knows all the waiters and stuff. And the waiter says to me, what will you have? And Red says, he'll have the liver. And I said, God, I hate liver. My mother made liver when I was a kid growing up in Staten Island. You could throw it against the wall and it would sit there for a week. And I said, Red, I hate liver. And he goes, trust me, you'll love it, right? And he also said, and I'll have a Dewar's and water, which was Red's drink, right? So, which I wasn't a Scotch guy. I was a kid. And so had my first Scotch, and the liver came, and it was fantastic. And I was like shoving it into my mouth, and Red's just sitting there with this shit-eating grin on his face. I mean, it was great. And so I had this relationship with him where he would kind of like pull me aside from time to time and just try to like regale me with some knowledge from all of his years in the sport. I remember when during the Ray Williams, Bill Cartwright, Michael Ray team, and so the writers were always having this ongoing debate about whether the Knicks should be a half court sets team or a fast break team. And he overheard us arguing about it one day at practice. And after practice, he kind of pulled me, get over here. And I walked over and he said to me, what you guys were talking about over there? He said, don't write that crap. And I said, why, Red? And he goes, I watched the Boston Celtics play. They have 3 or 4 of the slowest guys in the league, but they run the best fast break because it's all positioning. It's all understanding the flow of the game and taking what the defense gives you, right? He said, the best teams in all of history, our teams, championship teams, we could play fast, we could play slow. It's instinctive basketball knowledge. And I'll never forget that, and I always would use that when I was trying to analyze a team, strengths and weaknesses. But those are the kind of things that Red was about, and I don't know why he was that nice to me. Because I wrote some things that he did not like because the pressure was on me as a young beat reporter at the Post to please the editors at that paper. And write. They used to hear every day from our editors, write for the back page, write for the back page. Didn't mean you would get on the back page, but the message was, we want racy stuff. And for someone like Red, who didn't have that, he didn't deal with that back in the heyday, some of that was difficult to digest. But, Red, of course, Red would never give you any of that stuff himself. He never had a bad word to say about anybody.
And Red didn't see color. Clyde talks about it all the time. He was just, he was a blue collar guy. I was a little bit older than some of the ball boys, so I would go up to the office every night before the game and get the 8mm canister of black and white film of the previous time that team that was in the Garden played. We put it on in the locker room and it would be on in the background to the players. One night he called me up and said, "You're not bringing the film down. Here's a $20 bill. Take this pot of baked beans," as it turned out, to this address. And his wife, Selma, was a great cook. The players loved her cooking. He did this every once in a while. And he gave me an address, and you mentioned the individual before. It was a brownstone off of Park Avenue. It was Dustin Hoffman's house. And I went to bring the pot of baked beans. Dustin Hoffman's wife, his first wife, a beautiful woman named Ann Byrne, who was an actress, a dancer. And Dustin Hoffman invited me into his kitchen. I had a Gatorade or a Coke, and he asked me how the players were. And I was amazed. And I could only be there a couple minutes. I had to get back to the Garden. About 2 weeks later, I'm in a timeout, and I'm holding the Gatorade. I love the timeouts, as I said. And I see this arm in the background waving to me. I was so focused on what Holzman and the players were saying. And I looked, and it was Dustin Hoffman. And he was waving to me, and he was sitting with his wife, Ann, and Elliot Gould and Barbara Streisand. And I just sat there and I said, this is unbelievable. That's why I never want to leave this place. And it was those type of stories. Plus, I knew at that point, I didn't know how special they were, but I knew that this assembled group, which you so eloquently discussed when the Garden was Eden, not only was it a special group of players, it was really a special group of people. And that's what made it so great. Okay. Should the Knicks go on and get to the finals and see some success, which they've righted the ship here in 2026, while it may not be as special as it was, what are your feelings on what will happen with that big gap of time in between? Obviously, the fans are great and it'll be well received, but how much different will it be from what you went through and wrote about?
Well, I think it's, again, it's a very different era. You could never have the drama of Game 7 and the speculation about whether Willis will or will not play, because today, from the second he left the locker room, somebody would be tweeting out, "Willis is on his way out." I mean, the social media aspect of it all. I think that so much time has passed. And I think if you leave Dolan out of it, which sometimes for people, especially media people like myself, can be hard to do because he created such a hostile workplace around there for me, around the Garden for media. But if you set him aside for the moment, this team, like the 70s, is filled with very likable guys. Jalen Brunson is Willis Reed there was no Nick on those championship teams who would be considered the best at his position. Willis wouldn't be considered as good as Wilt or Russell or, uh, um, and Frazier would take a back seat to Oscar and West, even though one-on-one in one game, I might be tempted to take Walt. Bradley was hardly, a great small forward in the annals of professional basketball. DeBusschere was a tremendous lunch pail player, but there are other guys, who would be rated as more talented. So Jalen Brunson kind of falls into that underdog, has that underdog quality. He's better than the sum of his parts, is a better way to put it. And Karl Anthony Towns is a terrific player, but has his faults. And there are other guys who are considered better than him. Josh Hart is a lunch pail guy too,
Hmm.
as is Anunoby. So I think this is a team that New York, this generation of Knicks fans can really relate to. And should they make it to the finals, I think this town will be on fire. You sense the buildup over the last few years. There was a tremendous anticipation last year once they took the Celtics out. Didn't work out, you know.
Game one.
I still
Yeah,
don't think, yeah, I don't think Indiana was a better team than the Knicks last year. I
me
think
either.
I think the Knicks lost one of those, inexplicable games, the bounce, all of that stuff. The second game, they got outplayed at home. Look, ask the Celtics, ask the Cleveland Cavaliers. You can't lose 2 games at home to another good team and survive those kinds of series. So it'll be very interesting. I can't tell you this, Mike, that in the last 2 or 3 years, as the Tibbs Knicks have now fused into the Mike Brown Knicks, and the team has been taking steps toward getting back to the finals for the first time since what, 99?
San Antonio. Yeah.
I have seen sales of When the Garden Was Eden take off. It's all in paperback now. The hardcover is out of print. There's still some floating around on eBay, but the paperback version of the book it sells, I can't give you the exact numbers, but it's over 1,000 every year. And at Christmas time and Father's Day, I can chart sales on through Amazon. The sales take off, and what I interpret that as, there's a whole generation of young people being pulled into this team now, and then they talk about it with their dads, or their uncles, and they wanna know more about the history of the team, and somebody will tell them, "Oh, in 1970, or in 1973," and they go and they buy the book because they wanna know more about this franchise they are suddenly in love with.
Harvey, it parallels, okay, what I do. I wanted to do this podcast for a few years, and my good friend, she passed away last June. You had mentioned her in the book as well, When the Garden Was Eden. Gwen Bloomfield. We stayed friendly for 53 years, and she always had my back when it came to events at the Garden, the celebrations. Even after I would not talk to her for 3 or 4 years, but she always was very, very loyal to me. And she said, I wasn't sure if I wanted to just cover the current team. So what I decided was, yes, I cover the current team, but I try to put bits of history, my experience in there, and we'll just leave it at that. I have gotten so many notes from some young fans, a little more impatient. They want a title now. What about the people who've been waiting 50, 53, 54 years? But when all of them ask, what can I do? What can I do to learn more about the team? I view When the Garden Was Eden as a textbook for Knick history. I really do, because it gave so much more than just what the Knicks did and what they won. So I can see that the numbers go up, especially with a town like this that gets excited about their team. And you brought up a great point. I think it's a very likable team. I really do. And I think Mike Brown has a very difficult job. And if he doesn't get to the finals, it's going to be deemed very unsuccessful. But it's just so tough to succeed here when the expectations are where they are with this current team.
Yeah, I mean, I think my reaction when the Knicks did fire Thibodeau was that you're setting his successor up, just as you say. Uh, the expectation is that this team gets to the finals, that it takes the step that it stumbled over last year, and that's a lot to put on someone in their first year, getting acquainted with the rotations and the players. And what happens if they lose in the second round? You fire Mike Brown because he lost in the second round and didn't even get back to the conference final? It's kind of like, it's setting him up for a very, very difficult task. I do believe, though, that even given how stellar the Celtics have been this year, which is I thought they'd be a play-in team, to be honest. But, given how good they've been this year, given how good Detroit has been this year, I still believe that if the playoffs started today, that the Knicks are the team to beat. They just can hurt you in more ways than the other I still say that given the amount of people the Knicks have, and now with some guys off the bench that they can bring, Alvarado is another good addition, that they are the most well-rounded team in the conference. And if they can somehow limit the damage when teams attack Brunson and Towns with, pick and roll, then I think they'll be okay.
I do too. They're certainly a resilient team. They have shown that repeatedly over the last couple of years in the playoffs. I was shocked when Thibodeau was let go. I think Alvarado will be a John Starks-like player, different position, point guard, but with that New York ferocity that the fans just love here. And I think that's going to help, especially from the defensive point of view on those minutes that they take Brunson out. Kolek lacks a little bit from the defensive end, but again, a fun team, and we can only hope. One of the things, Harvey, in trying to wrap this up and tie this end up, I also got from your book, Our Last Season, a book about many years with your dear friend, Michelle Musler, who was at the Garden for 45 years, okay? And you talked about Game 6 and 7 in Houston when the Knicks lost the championship to the Rockets. You know, you obviously were disappointed, and I think you were a little surprised that Michelle wasn't crazy disappointed. And I believe she made a statement, or you assumed that she felt that it's not always about the end result. It's about the journey
Exactly.
and the journey of being a fan. And if you can resolve yourself to that and just enjoy the journey, I think it takes a lot of pressure, if there is any pressure on a fan. It's about how the team is built. It's about, I think people that are loyal and appreciate the journey are much better when the team is going badly. Okay. And it's just a wonderful thing to be a sports fan. And that's the line, in addition to the great friendship that you two had, and again, so eloquently wrote about. But it's the journey of being a sports fan that has meant everything to me, to my father, to my brothers as loyal Knicks fans. It's about the journey.
Yeah, well, let me just say that we were talking before about young fans wanting to know more about the team, that you get notes, and I can base it on sales of When the Garden Was Eden. I would recommend Our Last Season to young fans. This is the book here. I happen to have a copy right here. And I would recommend it to young fans because whereas When the Garden Was Eden is about the championship years that I watched from a distance because I was in high school and early college, Our Last Season is really, in many respects, a sequel to When the Garden Was Eden because it covers all the years that I was around the Garden as a reporter and a columnist. And it's told through my relationship with a woman who sat literally behind the bench for 40 years. And ironically and sadly, her first year was 1974 as a season ticket holder. So she never did see the championship team. But through all those years and some really bad years where, the team just didn't play hard or the players didn't care or Michael Ray was doing drugs. And she used to say, I just want them to show up the way I show up. And I think that could be sort of a mantra for any fan, particularly those paying that kind of money to sit behind the bench.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, in Houston, she waited up for me at the hotel. And when I got back, we were just talking about the game. And I think as a fan, she could appreciate the long, long ride of that season to a seventh game of the finals, right? In steamy, humid Houston in the middle of June, and ultimately say they played their hearts out right to the bitter end. And at the end of the day, if you're a fan and you're a knowledgeable fan, you can understand that Akeem Olajuwon is just a little bit better player than Patrick Ewing. And sometimes it just comes down to that. And that's how she justified it and rationalized it. And never walked away from that feeling that she was somehow cheated. Now, a lot of people look back on that year and say, why didn't somebody strangle John Starks in game 7, shooting, what was it, 2 for 18? Um,
Yeah.
Honestly, I always faulted Patrick a little more than Starks because that was his team. And I was sitting behind the baseline right next to the Knicks bench for game 6 and 7 down there. And not one time did I see Patrick grab Starks by the shirt and say, get me the ball. And I love Patrick, but Patrick led by example. Like Willis, Patrick was always sweating, which was symbolic of how hard he worked and played, right? But he was not a vocal leader. And in that moment, somebody needed to. Now you say, why didn't Riley do it? Well, I had a long conversation with Riley about this a few years ago, and he honestly believed that John Starks was the most cold blooded guy on that team. And he had demonstrated that in game 6 in Indianapolis, when the Knicks were facing an elimination. Patrick had a very subpar game, and Starks bailed them out and brought them home. And even in game 7, when Patrick got the little putback for to get them into the finals.
That was the winner. Yeah.
It was Starks who broke the defense down, and when one of the Davis boys had to help out, the ball rolled off the rim. There was nobody there to block Patrick out, and he just dropped it in. But Starks was the guy. Riley, to this day, will tell you that he always believed that Starks was going to make one or two that would have put them over the top.
Yep. One final thing before we leave. I often wondered because I have followed great books that have been turned into movies, and in this way, when the Garden was Eden was actually put into the to 30 by 30 for ESPN. What was your experience, real quick, like that, working on that side of it as a producer for basically what you wrote?
I got the call that there was a group that wanted to develop the book, purchase the rights to the book, and develop it for a 30 for 30 through ESPN. And they wanted to hire Michael Rappaport, the actor, to direct it and narrate it. Michael's a crazy Knicks fan. I just thought, wow, how cool is this? And they asked me to be an advisor, as a consultant, but the official title would be co-producer. And I got to sit in on a number of the interviews. I got to actually conduct some of the interviews. I remember Jack Marin, a couple of others where Michael was out on the West Coast and the interview was taking place in the studio in New York. And then I sat in on interviews with Walt Frazier and Earl Monroe and a couple of others. And Mike would tell me, Rappaport would say to me, whenever you think I'm not getting to the heart of an issue or you have a question, just chime in. So it was so much fun. And I'll never forget the night that it premiered at the film festival downtown, and they moved it. They expected a pretty big turnout. They moved it to this huge, it was like a college, Manhattan Community College. It was a big auditorium. And we had a couple of hundred people attend the Tribeca Film Festival, which is, a Robert De Niro.
De Niro thing. Yeah.
And Phil came because he had just taken over as president of the Knicks. Cazzie Russell flew in. Dick Barnett was there. It was such a thrill to see this. I mean, books are wonderful. I love writing. I still love writing, but to see it come to life on the screen and to see the old video of it, there was something magical about that. And it was just a great night. I remember, to kind of sum it all up about who these Knicks are, I remember when I was calling around to the guys and saying, hey, guess what? Not only did we do the book, but now ESPN wants to do a 30 for 30. And I called Willis and I called Clyde, and, because again, they were going to have to sit down in front of a camera, and it wasn't as much time as like Willis. I spent like 4 days down in Louisiana with him, and Bradley, a series of interviews in Manhattan. It wasn't going to be that as much time as that, but they were all going to have to make themselves available in front of the camera. And Bradley, when I called Bradley and I told him about it, he said, I'll do it on one condition. I said, what's that? And I always call him Senator. I said, Senator, what's that? And he said, on the condition that it's not just about the 69-70 team, that it's about the 72-73 championship team as well. He always believed that team was overlooked, that the championship was won in the middle of the night in New York because it was a West Coast game.
True.
It's hard for young fans to imagine that a finals game would start at 11 o'clock at night on the East Coast, but that's the way it was back then. And so what he was saying was, if you're going to do this, then it's not just Cazzie Russell and Bill Hoskett and, the guys who were on that 70 team.
Donnie Mae.
It's Dean Meminger and, and Henry Bibby and all the guys. Anyone who participated in those two championships has to be in this film. And I thought, yeah, that sounds like that championship era Knicks team. It was one for all and all for one, and right to the point where they were going to be memorialized in a film.
Harvey, I've got to tell you, as long as I will do this podcast, the journey is going to be appreciated more by me. I so appreciate your time spending with us on the Knicks podcast, From the Bench, a Knicks podcast, and I hope we can do it again soon down the road, sir.
Sure. If when we get to the playoffs and, and the city is riveted by it, be happy to do it. But thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
I really enjoyed it, Harvey. Thank you so much for being on From the Bench, a Knicks podcast.